Good evening and welcome to the live members surgery. And of course, you might be consuming this surgery as a recording later through Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and our newly launched podcast on all major podcast services, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. My name is Scott Haslam, president of the Leeds #1 Amalgamated branch, and I'd be most grateful if you would help us reach as many members as possible by sharing this episode. And if you haven't done so, please consider subscribing to the Leeds #1 and Northeast regional pages on Facebook, the YouTube channels, and of course the podcast by searching CDBU Members Surgery. So in tonight's show, I'm honoured to be joined by Tony Kearns, the Senior Deputy General Secretary. Hi, Tony, and thanks for accepting our invitation. So tonight we want to talk about the CDBU redesign project, the Batley and Spen by-election, the result and what that means, the climate crisis, and much, much more. So don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you with any questions or comments. The surgery is designed to give you that opportunity to help mould the future of the CDBU. So let's get this session into full flow. Tony, would you like to open up this session and formally introduce yourself, and what does this SDGS actually do?
Good question. Thanks, Scott. So as you said, my name is Tony Kearns. I'm the Senior Deputy General Secretary of the Union, which is a bit of a title, a bit of a mouthful. But as the name implies, I'm the Deputy General Secretary, which means one of my tasks is to deputise for the General Secretary when Dave's not around, be that when he's on leave or he's at other meetings or whatever. And of course, unfortunately, when Dave was ill a few years ago, I had to step in and take up that role. When I'm not doing that, there's a very extensive and busy day job, not least of which is that, currently this union, through its membership subscriptions, generates an income of about £30 million. Somebody has to monitor that income. Somebody has to set the course of what we're going to do with that money in terms of investing it into the union, investing it into the members to make sure that this union is fit, if you like, both in a administrative way and a representative way to look after its members, which means deciding what happens to that £30 million of income. And my role is to sort of set that course, set that budget. And out of that falls a whole heap of responsibilities about securing the members' money, safeguarding the members' money, so on and so forth, all the processes and procedures that go in place for that. And, the minutiae of, running 150 to Broadway, running 150, 160 members of staff, and basically making sure that the union gets by on a day-to-day basis, I think is a simple way to describe that. But there you go. That's just a very brief overview.
Very brief, but I suppose we could be here for the full hour just going through your full duty description, but nevertheless. So we have had a good sample there of what you do, Tony. A very integral part of the general running of the union. So, in terms of moving into some of the areas we're going to discuss then. So, CW redesign. There were a special conference a couple of years ago, and I think we're in October, was it? If I remember serves me right. I was one of the few people from our branch that went and was part of that conference, and I actually did a sort of summary of what were passed and what have you on our YouTube channel if people want to go and nose at that. But in essence, would you like to sort of talk about CW redesign and what is the purpose of CW redesign, and has it sort of changed and molded a little bit over the last 2 years given different effects of recent times?
Okay, well, where to begin? So when Dave was first elected as General Secretary just over 6 years ago, and those of you around at the time will remember, he stood on an agenda that the union needed to change direction, needed to change course. And then there were a number of, if you like, factors or issues that came into discussion then about, well, what exactly do we mean by that? So redesign really is about reshaping the union, both in terms of its outlook and in terms of its structures, primarily to do two things. One is to make sure that it is responsive to members' needs, that we're able and best equipped to represent our members in the workplace on a day-to-day basis, because the union is nothing if it's not able to represent its members. And secondly, of course, with all the pressures that we've faced over the years, to make sure that this union is sustainable on an ongoing basis. And by sustainable, we mean that, I made that reference earlier to the union's income. The union's income drops year on year, primarily because of membership loss. And again, in turn, that's mostly in the two major industries we represent in BT and Royal Mail, even though we represent a number of other industries. Centres around employer-led activities, if you like, the downsizing of those organisations has a knock-on effect to where we are. So, mindful of that, and mindful that if nothing happened, the union could be, in a precarious position. The redesign project set out to make sure that, if you like, the assets the union have got, are they being utilised properly on behalf of the members? The structures we got, are they the right structures that we've got in place to make sure that we can represent members in the workplace, that we can communicate properly with members, and that members have, if you like, the best opportunity to input into the union through both the democratic processes of voting for local and national reps, through how they have their say on policy, and through to just engagement processes like this, if you like. And, it's a marvellous initiative to get people involved. It doesn't happen in every single branch. And part of the process is to review what happens in each branch. How are they responding to members' needs? How are they planning for the future? So it's a massive exercise that we've undertaken with a lot of different strands, which has been fine-tuned, as you say, Scott, over the years. By necessity, really. Once other people's ideas have come into play, we've picked them on some of them, dismissed some of our original ideas. But, it's all designed to make sure that the CW is seen as, if you like, the strongest union in the workplace. And has been for some time. I think that's almost accepted amongst the trade union movement. But that just doesn't happen by default. And there's no guarantee that will continue to happen unless we have a look at ourselves and, if you like, restructure, refocus, and therefore redesign the organisation, to make sure that it is sustainable going forward, but it's sustainable for the purpose, and that purpose being to make sure it represents and engages with its members. I think is a sort of expanded overview, if that suits.
Yeah, that sounds somewhat. So, when people talk about redesigning something, sometimes they go from the ground up, and sometimes they'll say it's from the top down. How would you sort of describe the redesign? Is it a bit of both, or is it one redesign it from the top down or from the bottom up?
I think it's horizontal. Actually, I think it goes right across the union. Yeah. Insofar as, we recently had an online conference in April this year, which made changes to the national executive structure, which was to bring more lay members onto the national executive to make sure that we're representative of, if you like, the totality, the demographic and the gender makeup of our membership, to make sure that those views are represented at national level, through to restructuring and redesigning how our regional processes work, again, to make sure that they're more responsive, and now to engage with branches about, what's their planning for the future, how do they engage with their members. So I'd sort of say, on a structural level, it's right across the union. There are, of course, going to be certain things that can only happen at headquarters, the money comes into headquarters, for want of a better phrase. So setting a course of action for that and changing how we deal with the members' money. There's certain things that can only happen at national level. But the idea is that, we want to make this union live for its members more than it ever has done in the past. And there's various ways of doing that. So that's, if you like, a sort of answer to that question, really.
Yeah. Well, I do see changes, like you've explained already, on the executive. I also see, changes really with how people are conducting themselves, whether it be branch level or regional level. So particularly in the North East, we've got quite a mix of people who's getting engaged with the Facebook page, and I'm helping out there with the Lease Live type thing. So it's all evolving. I think really from that redesign sort of idea. So in terms of like future proofing, it sort of ties into sort of membership density as well, and recruiting new members. So we were having a natter before, weren't we, about some real opportunities for working people in terms of joining unions. We've seen a slight change there with an increase across the membership of trade unions, but equally within the CWU itself, we're now tapping into new areas of technical expertise, the Utah branch. I just wonder if we could explore that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I mean, as I said earlier, we've seen, we can all branches and you'll have seen this in workplaces. We'll have seen a sort of decline in the traditional areas of our membership, and if we don't do anything about that, there's a tendency then to sort of slide off the page. We're a long way from that, but you can't just watch trends and go, well, that's an interesting thing to watch, and not do anything about it. It's not a response. My responsibility is not to just sit there and go, oh, that's an interesting graph pointing downwards on membership. It's like, well, what are we going to do about that? And there's two angles to that. One is to sort of revisit and look again at our traditional areas of recruitment, for want of a better phrase. Those where we are, quite strong. Royal Mail, BT, Parcel Force, Santander, POL, those areas, and test out whether we need to have a different approach than what we've had in the past. Because, there are still thousands of members in both of those major industries that are not in the union. We need to find a way into tapping into that. But we're also not naive enough to recognize a trend that actually what's really happening here is a downsizing, for want of a better phrase, in both of those industries for a variety of reasons. And so we need to look elsewhere. So you're right, the technical allied workers branch, which has grown from nothing to 310 in a matter of less than a year. And the potential to grow much further, we sort of made them an autonomous virtual branch, so they can do that, is the type of thing that we're trying to assess now, and trying to put, if you like, dip our toe in the water thing, to try new things in other areas. Because whilst you're right about an upturn in a noticeable upturn in trade union membership, across the country, there are still large sectors, particularly in the private sector, of unorganized workers. And there's opportunities there for us to look at that. And so we're exploring things like student rates. So if you take the technical workers, the number of students going into universities and colleges who with a view to getting into the IT sector when they become into work, well, we should be tapping into that now. We should be tapping into, if you like, our families and offering family membership, so as we can get that culture of being in a union and what a union is about and what union you can do beyond just the people who work in Royal Mail premises or BT premises or Parcel Force premises. So yeah, there's a wider look at what we need. So we set up dedicated recruitment and organising committee and team to examine that over the next few months, to start putting into place, definite plans to grow this membership, not just where we currently are, but also in areas that we've never stepped before. And, it's an exciting project, it's exciting times, and all the evidence is still that the major factor in people not joining a union is because they never asked. And so, we need to find a way of going asking them. That's the point.
So on the back of that then, Tony, then we really should ask, if you're not a member of the CWU, then do join the CWU. Across the ticker, we've got the website link, that's www.cwu.org/join-us. So you have now formally been asked by not only me, but Tony Kearns, our Senior Deputy General Secretary. So the redesign project as well, sort of delved into sort of the assets of the union. Now, there's different viewpoints on assets. I mean, in the context of a company, assets are there to be stripped and then paid to the shareholders. I mean, we don't have shareholders, but we have shareholders is in members. So does that mean we're going to be looking at strapping the assets and then giving money back to the members? Or does that mean we're actually going to be a bit more sensible and pragmatic about it and actually, assess whether or not that's a viable bit of real estate, whether we're getting value from it? If it's not, then, can we divert that and invest it somewhere else? And what sort of opportunities might that bring?
So, I mean, quite timely question, to be honest with you, Scott, primarily because we do have assets. I mean, we had three main assets, which were our headquarters building at 150 Broadway, our education training centre, Alva Scott Lodge, which is in rural Oxfordshire, and what used to be a residential education and training centre, the Elstead Hotel in Bournemouth, which were legacy issues from the two unions that formed the CWU. But of course, over time, the amount of, if you like, classroom-based learning we've had to do is diminished because the size of the union is diminished, and so we don't need those 2 centres. So we've been involved and engaged in a process where we sold Alverscott Lodge, got the money, got a decent price for it, banked the money, and we're in the process of looking at this to do the same with the Elstead Hotel. But that's not just so as we can, get a load of cash in the bank and I can sit back and look at, a nice balance in a bank account and go, what a job done there. Look at all those zeros because we sold those 2 premises. That's not the idea. The idea is that actually when we first bought both of those premises, they were bought on the back of membership subscriptions. So what we now need to do is reinvest that money in the union to make sure that the union is, if you like, fit for purpose in the 21st century. So, that means, are our reps equipped properly? Are our reps trained properly? That means, are our IT systems, as good as they can be to support reps and support branches in the work they do? And that's really the task that we've got in front of us. And funny enough, we've got a special NEC next week, which is designed to discuss that, sort of what we would call an investment strategy. And likewise, we've got that 5-story building, 150 to Broadway, which I think the consensus of the people who work there on a daily basis is it's too big for our needs. But actually, it's a valuable asset. You just don't want to asset strip, I think was the comment you made. We don't want to do that. So what we're doing is engaging with companies now to see if we could rent out space at 150 to Broadway to other people, which will, if you like, boost our income, which of course in turn makes the union more sustainable going forward and sort of offsets some of the losses we've seen in terms of membership income. So you're right. There's no point in having assets of the union if they don't work for the members of the union. And my task, if you like, is to set a project up, which I've drafted a document going to the NEC next week, which sort of sets out an investment strategy for the union in a number of key areas: education and training, communication, so as you can communicate better with our members, our IT infrastructure, our frontline reps, finding a package for our frontline reps that fully equips them and supports them in delivering on behalf of the members. And that's the sort of discussion that we're going to have next week.
I mean, in terms of some of the reinvestment opportunities, so I mean, I quite like this concept of, in effect, subbing out some of the areas that 150 the Broadway, for example. It's very apt really, because when we're in sort of talks with Rommel as a company, for example, we're talking about new markets and growing and utilising the services what we've got there, and effectively that's a very similar sort of ideology what we're looking at in terms of this real estate view. But in terms of going forward and what sort of investments, we were sort of talking about this CW app, for example, and that's not necessarily a free thing, is it? It's something that we're going to have to invest in as an organisation, as a trade union. But equally, I know you wanted to sort of like gauge sort of interest from our membership who might be viewing tonight about what other areas you'd like to see us invest in. So what sort of ideas has been bouncing around 150 the Broadway amongst the national executive, or indeed just you and Dave, for example, and see if we can gauge some interest, and then we might be able to pick that up in next month when I've got a session with Chris Webb, who deals with specifically in communications as well.
Well, funny enough, Kurt, you asked that question. Funny enough, communications is going to be one of the key areas about, what do we need to invest in? So, you're doing this format here, which is live, which people can come on and ask questions. I might pick up on one or two of the points made in the chat box there, if that's okay, in a minute. But not people need training to be able to have the confidence to do this. People need to feel that they've got the equipment to do it. People need to know how to, if you like, just run a session like this. Not everybody has the skill, not everyone's got the organizational skills to do it. Your branch is lucky that they've got you, Scott, who's capable of doing that. But not every branch is in the same position, which is why one of the things we're doing is we've introduced what we're calling like 13 measures for branches, that we want to sit down with branches and find out what it is they're doing, how they're operating, how they're organizing. So, so as we've got, if you like, a standard, and when members join the union, they can expect a certain standard, from the union to represent them. One of the other things, and there's not a specific, but one of the other things is, depending on which branch you come from, and depending on how big that branch is, and depending on how much money that branch has got, will depend, what piece of equipment that your branch will give you. Do the branches give all reps a mobile phone? The branches give all reps a laptop so they can communicate and read agreements, and and particularly since the pandemic, take part almost in a virtual world. And I just know that the answer to that is no. Not all reps have the same equipment. Not all reps are trained to the same standard, and so we need to make sure that that's the case, because those reps are there to represent workers in the workplace. And if they're not all trained to the same standard, not all equipped to, if you like, a minimum standard, then some of our members are getting different levels of service not through want of effort or will on behalf of those reps. But you're right, the stuff like the app, these things need to be developed. Technology is not cheap, so it's those type of things that we're investing in. On the issue of comms, again, this question. We vacillate between those who will say, I want a hard copy, printed copy delivered to my door of the union's journal, so as I can open it and sit down and read it with a cup of tea and a cup of coffee. And I want more of that, right the way through to the other end of the scale, particularly younger members. We're so used to reading everything and seeing everything on social media, much more used to watching videos, as opposed to, dare I say, people of my age, which was always reaching for something in print and keeping hold of it for future reference. Younger people are much more interested in the video clip and that sort of access to information. And so, like, trying to find that balance in the communication strategy is what we need to do. And now, again, that requires investment. And so, there's sorts of things that we're looking at. Just one of the things. A couple of the questions that have come up. Well, we didn't get 1.5 million. We got 1.75 million for it. Just a small point, but it's just a correct point. Look, was it the envy of every other union? I don't believe that. But that's just the view. It was a unanimous decision of the executive, actually, it was discussed at the redesign conference that Scott referred to. We had this discussion, and the vote was overwhelming about what we should do with our assets. So, we're here to make sure that we best use the assets. Here's the other thing about Alva Scott Lodge, and I fully understand the attachment that a number of people have to that. But the thing about Alva Scott Lodge is, at any one time in a year, we've probably got 4,500 reps. If you think about it, if you think about the number of units we've got and how many reps we've got in this country, we've probably got about 4,000 reps minimum. In any one year, the maximum number of individuals who went through Alva Scott Lodge from training was about 250, 300. You just weren't reaching people. We can reach a lot more people in a different way. I know it's a massive debate, but that's just a fact, and that's what led to that decision.
No, I mean, everyone's got a viewpoint, I think, on Alva Scott as a site, or the idea what it was for, and I think most people will share the same viewpoint that it was a gold top type facility. But the question really is the gold top appropriate for, coming back to what we were talking about in terms of our membership, our representation structure, and the amount of cash flow that we've got to run as an independent trade union, and is there better ways and more effective ways of running that similar type of training? Now, I know that hasn't fully been exhausted, and that'll be developed over the time, and perhaps if we're looking at the investment side of stuff, then I'm quite confident that we'll end up with something that will be meaningful to the regions and to our members and reps across the country. So, but it's good actually, because it's picking up actually from what Dave was saying a few weeks. As a trade union, we will challenge our officials, and our members will challenge our officials, and they're there challenging. And off to you, Tony, you picked up on it and you've answered it. So that's what we are as a CWU, and I think that's good. So in terms of I think Sadie had mentioned something earlier in relation to a sort of little bespoke area that is sort of a tag to you, but you don't strictly necessarily actually deal with it directly, because we have a national executive elected person, which is now Norman Candy, I believe, for their retired section. And what she asks is also to look after retired members. We pay our dues and still promote membership to the new employees, and we're utilised more with our time. And actually, historically, I think a lot of branches did piggyback the retired sections for helping out with certain admin stuff. In certainly Leeds did anyway. It's been a bit difficult last 12 months with the pandemic and having to shut down offices and such. But to pick up on the retired section that is tagged to you, Tony, how important really is that section to the trade union, and really how do you see it working once the restrictions relaxed and we can sort of move forward a bit, particularly on the back of the 50-year strike and remembering our history and such?
Well, there's a number of angles to it. First of all, it's always important to remember our history. Our history is what brought us to the position we are today, and I think that's vitally important. And I think sort of remembering that or commemorating that with the people who were in the union at the time, in the union today, was the right thing to do. I think Sadie's right. I think branches should be engaging with their retired members. I think the phrase I hear from back in my own branches in Liverpool is like, well, we're the ones with time on our hands. We can come in and help. And that branches should embrace that. Where do we see it going? This is an interesting thing here. I mean, first of all, retired membership is dipping. Yeah, we're below 13,000 for the first time in the union's history. In some ways, it's not a surprise. Partly because total membership is reducing. Yeah. So if total membership is reducing, then the pool that we dip into to recruit retired members from also reduces. The other thing is that, and it's a sort of a change that's come about through, I feel like, there not being the sort of normal retirement age where, well, back in the day, everyone left at 60 and then it was 65, so on and so forth. You sort of knew the day when everyone was going. You don't know that now. And a lot of people are leaving before what they consider to be retirement age. And what we found is sort of people who are taking whatever deals are on offer from whatever company they work for, leaving in their mid to late 50s. And we say to them, do you want to join a retired member section? And they're like, well, their view of what retired looks like is like a load of old people, sitting at home, doing whatever old people do. And they sort of don't class themselves in that bracket because, they're taking their bits and pieces early. And so they tend not to want to join retired. So there's two challenges there. The first is, do we need to revisit what we're calling that section from retired members and set out its stall? And the second thing, particular point you make about Norman Candy being re-elected, is the young workers representatives in this union. We've developed a situation where they're almost like an autonomous body now. So they make their own, they write their own agenda. They feel like they follow their own lead. They get together and determine what are the issues that they need to campaign on. And that's the sort of approach we're trying to be, or want to introduce for the retired members. We've had that in the past where it's been officer-led. And, anything the retired members want, they write to the officer or have a meeting with the officer, and the officer does or doesn't carry that out, depending on what that is. And that's been going on for decades. And so we're trying to change that approach, Scott, to sort of try and get that to be more engaging, more hands-on. We've gone from a position where, aside from the financial stuff, they now get a full vote on the executive. So we're trying to do that. That's the sort of approach we're taking.
I mean, it's funny. John, I think it's John Carson will be taking up the NEC lead for our young workers, and I've seen him speak at conference. He's quite a passionate lad from the Glasgow branch, I believe, and yeah. I think it'd be quite interesting to actually do a session with John and Norman perhaps together. So effectively, we've got like a yin and yang, a young and an experienced person, and actually sort of have that debate, really looking at the 50-year strike and what similarities they are then to they are now and such. And I think that'd be quite an interesting session. So if people think that would be a good session, do let us know in the comments, and I'll get in touch with John and Norman and see if we can sort of arrange one of these surgeries for them. So in terms of moving on to the hot topic that was Batley and Spen, that's a constituency in our branch in Leeds, and it was triggered really by Tracy Braben becoming a Metro Mayor for West Yorkshire, first female Metro Mayor in the country. A significant win, really, I felt for Tony. For Labour rather, not for you. It was a very tight by-election, no less. And funny enough, I mean, a couple of weeks ago when we had Dave on and asked him to call the election. Now, he felt initially that maybe Labour were going to lose that one, and then he saw what were happening on the ground. And I think we really need to give recognition to the North East region, John Woodhouse and the team that went out and did some canvassing, door knocking and everything else, because clearly that had a significant effect on the outcome. There may well have been some other reasons and factors that could have come in with Hancock Gate, but and obviously the anomaly, which was George Galloway. So what happened was Labour managed to win and retain that by a matter of 323 votes. Absolutely. So you know, what's your sort of take on how that election evolved, Tony?
Okay. So, well, first of all, congratulations to Dave for having the foresight to call it close when everyone else was on the line that it was going to be another Hartlepool type disaster. So fair play to Dave for that. I mean, what's my take on it? Well, let me sort of semi-official union version is, look, one, not electing a Tory MP as far as CW is concerned is good. There's no getting away from that. So therefore, you know, if that's one more Labour MP or one existing Labour MP seat remains in Labour hands, that's a good thing. Let's be clear on that. There's no doubt on that. The Batley and Spen by-election, it's always difficult, I think, to judge the result of single by-elections, you know, as like a barometer, an indicator of, if you like, long-term or wider-term trends, primarily because for some reason that, you know, by-elections are triggered for different reasons. And this one came with some, you know, some tragic and for one to say emotional backgrounds, given the candidates who stood this time and, you know, the relationship to, you know, to the MP that was murdered, and you can't ignore that. So where does it sit? Well, look, there's any number of takes on this. First of all, Labour won. Yeah, in the first past the post electoral system, Labour won, and that's all that matters in that way. It's a straight fight, and Labour won, and that can only be a good thing. And then you can have different takes. You can have to take that, or the last two general elections, the Green Party got over 600 and over 900 votes and didn't stand this time. So if they'd have just turned up and done their usual, Labour wouldn't have won. That's a debate. Then there's the debate around, well, how big was the Matt Hancock issue? And that's anecdotal. People on the doorstep will have a view that it was or it wasn't, so on and so forth. Galloway, you know, I keep it clean about my personal opinions of George Galloway. Not that it really matters in a wider context, but, you know, Galloway is there. I don't think it's a helpful intervention in politics in the 21st century. I don't. My take on it is it's divisive and doesn't help the wider debate about what, if you like, for want of a better phrase, our members need in terms of politics. And what our members need in terms of politics, and brings us back to the substantive point, is a political party that represents their interests on a regular basis. And I have to say, we don't look as anywhere near as close to that today as we did in the not too recent past, and I think that's a shame. But, you know, our position is clear. You know, we've got a firm agenda about changing the world of work. We've got a new agenda about making sure that workers get a proper deal going forward. You know, and our task, both at national level and local level, is to, you know, put the pressure on the party through electing the right people into the right places in the party, through going to the right policy forums, to going to party conference and making that argument. So yeah, I think it was a bad take, if I'm being honest, to come out of that and make the statement that Labour is back. You know, Labour's vote was 7.5% down, and I don't think that's something to shout about. But again, I go back to my original point. It was the first past the post election and Labour won. But I think there's lessons to be learned all around there. particularly about to do it in a goldfish bowl, because that election was, if you like, the full weight of, if you like, I say this, the Westminster bubble media not understanding, if you like, they present this picture of the so-called Red Wall and so-called Northern Towns. You can tell by my accent, I'm not from London. The so-called Northern Towns as this like monolith that everybody thinks the same way, everyone acts the same way. And I think it's disrespectful. And I think the Labour Party is in danger of falling into that trap as well. And it needs to get out a bit quick. Otherwise, the gains that it's going to need to make back in that so-called Red Wall, a phrase I don't like using, but it's what everyone recognises, that's not going to happen unless they start understanding that there are particular circumstances here, and until they offer something for the people they're trying to win back, particularly if you allow the traditional working class vote.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tony. I mean, particularly my viewpoint from what I would be described as in that Red Wall. I still am in a red constituency at Hemsworth. John Trickett is my MP, and my sort of observations really is whether you actually agreed with Jeremy Corbyn and that era. What you can't disagree with is what happened with the Labour Party membership and them demographics. And what we've seen really, isn't it, is that some of the demographics that joined Labour are now floating away for probably a few reasons. I personally think that in the north anyway, and Yorkshire and Lancashire, I think what you're seeing is people jumping to candidates that represent their localities. So people that are actually from Yorkshire, standing in Yorkshire, and I think that probably had a factor up in Hartlepool, that they moved someone from a different constituency into that constituency to stand. I think that were a mistake. They didn't make the same mistake with Kim Ledbetter, but there was issues, I suppose. They went for the I suppose a compassionate link with a sister, I think, which again I think were a bit of a coward's way out, really. So I always think that there's those people in Labour which came to Labour and then maybe turn into maybe the Greens, and you sort of alluded to that really, that maybe the Greens withheld so Labour could get in. There's viewpoint in Chesham that's what happened with Labour and the Liberal Democrats, that out of 600 CLP members in that constituency, we would presume all 600 voted plus 23 people. So that would suggest there was some tactical voting going off there, and I just think that Labour are missing and becoming, I think, to quote Dave, irrelevant in some regards because they don't know what they stand for, which is unfortunate. I need to go back to basics. But is there any other comments you want to dwell on that one? Expand.
I think you're right there about, if you look at the age demographics now I'm just talking about opinion polls, which some people can dismiss, but they're not, to the nth degree accurate, but they're a fair indicator of where the people stand currently. And, the number of young people who voted for the Labour Party in 2017 and to a lesser extent in 2019, who now don't express an interest in voting for the Labour Party and in the recent by-elections didn't vote for the Labour Party, is alarming. Because what it shows in the age demographic is actually as people get older, they shift to the right. The generalisation, it doesn't apply to everybody, but that's what the demographics are showing. So, of course, in an ageing population, if Labour's not capturing the young vote now, its chances of electoral success in 3, 4, 5 years' time are really in jeopardy. And on Dave's point about it doesn't represent our interest, but our task here, of course, is to do what we can to make sure it does. And as I say, that is us taking policies to Labour Party conference, getting people into CLPs and positions, getting people as councillors so as they can make a difference in their community. You're right about the choice of the candidate. I'm not really expressing a view on that, but it was clearly wrong in Hartlepool, and it's been clearly wrong in some elections elsewhere. As the point you just said, John Trickett, and I know John. I mean, it's the thing that if Labour's vote loss in Batley and Spen is replicated there, John Trickett's not an MP. And John Trickett's not the only one, by the way. So Labour's got a problem, and that's why I say coming out of that and saying Labour is back. Well, actually, if you applied that 7% loss to a whole number of other seats in that area, Labour ends up with less MPs than it's currently got. And so, and we're back to that point about setting out a vision. That vision's got to be, that vision's got to be placing a deal for those people that wanted to vote for it. And we're arguing there has to be a new deal for workers. They have to support workers, who are bearing the brunt and are going to bear the brunt, if you like, of the cost of the pandemic. There's a whole economic argument about why the government's narrative on that is false, but it's going to get spun, and that's where the attacks are going to come. That's what the Tories do. And of course, Chris Pollock's point about about keeping your social distance from co-workers is a very good point and very well made, and one I agree with.
There you go. We won't put it on screen though, Chris, but if you are on Facebook, then it'll be there on the feed, just in case we don't get criticised there. But AJ saying hi. There we go. So I mean, it's going to be some challenging times for Labour going forward, and I think this idea, what do we do now before a general election, and the CDB sort of policy that Dave touched on a couple of weeks about is we don't need to sit back and wait for a Labour government. We're going to have to act now. So we need to come together with other trade unions, get those deals, such as the new deal for workers, and work with other organisations. Sport came up, and you and I was chatted the other day, didn't we? And sort of sport came into about getting into trying to portray the CWU as actually not trying, but actually portraying the CWU as in not just a union that goes on strike because of its industrial strength, but actually it's something that does some good for the communities by getting involved with family football teams and local aspects there. Food banks was a strong topic, which really has been born out of the current government sort of regime for the last 10 years. Isn't that right then, Tony?
Absolutely, man. I can recall going to my own branch, speaking of my own branch, ex-branch in Liverpool some years ago, and we having a discussion about, who's going to give us support when we've got our backs to the wall. And you can't just automatically like expect that. So, if there's like a library getting closed and there's people campaigning to keep it open, the union should be going down there and going, that's a public resource. We want to keep that open. We should be standing next to those other groups who, if you like, who are losing their resources. Sure start centres, local NHS walk-in centres, as I say, libraries. That's when those things are going and campaigns are being run. The trade union and our trade union should go, but this is where our members live. They live in these communities. Their lives are going to not be better or even made worse by some of the actions that are taking place in their communities. And rather than just saying, well, we're only interested in those things that happen 9 to 5. Yes, then if you're like the 9 to 5, the shift work and stuff is our bread and butter. That's what we're here to do. But then we can't ignore like that when our members step outside, the social services that are on offer to them, the support mechanisms that exist in the community itself is where they live, and exist. And things that affect the community affect our members. We should be reaching out and doing that. And so we got to the position on that my old branch, practically runs food donations. An arm of its branch runs food donations. It helps kids out at Christmas, sponsors grassroots football, it sponsors local rugby league with some of its money. To say to the community, we're not just that postal workers who go on strike when there's a big issue. We're also part of this community, and we deal with that. And I think we need to develop that concept more. And in doing that, then you are also then reaching out to other workers and saying, well, what else does this union do apart from coming to support us? Well, we're about a new deal for workers. We're about this union and our communities being better treated and getting a better deal. And that's how you start to get your message across. And I think that's vitally important.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few comments there. Cleveland and Mal agreeing with you entirely there. Same, and actually said he'd come up with a valid point there about women's refugees, where the government's putting into the Queen's yacht, which just seems to go against the grain with what's happening in the community. So you're absolutely right there. So we're going to move on to, I think, the climate crisis. But just briefly before we do, have you got any insight? I presume this is coming from either Joanne or John in the region, but about just going to spawn about the COVID terms and getting back to physical meetings and trainings and the sort of process there, because although these online formats are useful and have been necessary over the last 12 months, I think there is a keen view, particularly when you see likes of the executive going to our Birmingham premises, for example, or meeting up in Liverpool. So have you got any a quick insight there of where a document may or may not be coming forward?
The simple answer is yes, we're reviewing that almost as we speak. I've got meetings over the next few days, both with our HR people, but I've had to use a 150 to Broadway, which is a place of work for staff first and foremost, and it has to be safe for staff. But a number of reps, including the North East Regional Secretary, come down and go there for meetings. So we are looking at that. But I mean, we've got a dilemma here. On the one hand, the government's been universally slammed for its pronouncements that on the 19th of July the world goes back to normal, when there's a Delta variant running riot through the population, and all the problems that brings. But we need to avoid that trap of going, well, for the CW, everything goes back to normal on the 19th of July because there's a risk there, and we have to analyse those risks about getting people from different parts of the country back into a room. That's not to say we're not going to do it. We're looking at it. We've booked a venue for a physical conference next year, and we'll be shortly advertising that. It'll be in a month. That won't surprise you. At a venue that won't surprise you. I'll say no more than that, but it's just that's just what we're able to do. So yes, we are looking at that, he says.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I mean, yeah, it's just apt really. You just talked about restrictions on COVID. I mean, particularly when I did the session I was telling you the other day, Tony, that I didn't feel particularly great when I worked with did this session for Dave, and as it happened the next day, I had to do a test and I came out positive. So I did that under being unwell really with COVID. So, and it's quite possibly with the Delta variant. So, but we're all fit and well now, which is good. So, in terms of the climate crisis, so it's something and a subject matter that you're particularly passionate about, Tony. And to be fair, I think more and more people are getting on board with this this issue really, because they're actually seeing it now day to day, or certainly year on year. In terms of like breaking records, like worse floods and extreme weather and everything else. But do you want to sort of bring in from your perspective and why you're sort of passionate around it, and maybe how that's linking in with our members?
Well, actually, the point is to make it live for our members, insofar as there is a climate crisis. I think there is. I'm saying as a statement of fact. There will be people who don't agree with that, but I'm starting from a position that all the scientific evidence shows that it is. And if you look at the major organisations who are behind funding the research that comes to the conclusion that it isn't, or it's not as bad as it. It's like all these things, it's follow the money. And the money goes back to people like the Koch brothers in America. These things go back to, if you like, predominantly right-wing think tanks in America, predominantly backed by the fossil fuel industry. There's no getting away from that. Now, the problem we've got, of course, is we've developed a way of living that is heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and there is no switch we're going to flick. Bad metaphor there, given the use of electricity. There's no switch that we're going to flick that suddenly ceases that or stops that overnight. I mean, I'm not naive enough to believe that. There are some people in the environmental movements who believe that. I think they're wrong. But what we need to do, in terms of building a movement that understands this, is one to start explaining in sort of very simple terms what is happening with the climate and why that affects our members, both in a general sense and in an individual sense. That are going. Here's my prediction. It's a prediction based on, as you say, I have I've been on climate camps. I've been on climate demonstrations. I've been doing this for a long time. It is just one of the political things that I believe in or involved in. But in the longer term, like the air we breathe is going to become more poisonous. In the longer term, there's going to be less fresh water on this planet. There are already, in large parts of the world, major crop failings that are going to lead to huge food shortages. And actually, the sort of recent events we've seen in terms of wars for oil, as they were called, and conflicts over that type of territory, I think will shift. They will shift into, if you like, battles for resource. You've already seen Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, talking about water supply on the east coast of America. Water supply in San Francisco, California, is not as good as it used to be. Water supply in parts of Australia is drying up. Australia is becoming a bigger desert than it already is, and these are going to have impacts upon the food supply chain, and which will affect jobs, which will affect how people live their lives, will affect the availability of food. And we need to sort of get this into a place where our members understand this on a general level, an individual level, but also understand what they can do about changing that. The funny thing is, one of the reasons that Labour's vote amongst youngster people is dropping off, there's a clear pattern that it is shifting to the Green Party. Now, whilst I might be what some people call an environmentalist, I'm not a fan of the Green Party. I don't believe it's an organisation that is going to engage with or represent the working class in any meaningful way, and I wouldn't advocate supporting them. But young people, not steeped in trade union, if you like, involvement, not steeped in the sort of party politics that we grew up with, even if you weren't involved, it was always in the background, don't see the Labour Party as being the answer to that. They see the Green Party. Yeah. And there's a mindset there that, if you like, the trade union movement's not tapping into. And I'm not talking about the generalization of like tree huggers and the way people go on about that, and digging a tunnel and living down it for 30 days. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we have to make this live. And it's little practical things like you take postal workers who deliver to every single address in this country. They're walking up and down the streets where the quality of air is getting worse and worse, and they're going to suffer in the longer term from respiratory problems because of the CO2 emissions that are in the atmosphere. Same for our open reach workers who are out fixing your green box on the corner or putting up a telegraph pole. They're affected by this. Our members are going to be affected by it on a day-to-day basis, and it's how we develop that narrative and make it live for our members that's going to be the challenge. But I'm convinced that's the challenge we're going to have to meet.
It's quite that point that you mentioned about postal workers and the BT engineers and that working out on the streets. Because I mean, funny enough, you see more of those people in the cities because of the densities. So the jobs justify more people. So you get more of our workers then in those congested areas. But equally, then we've got to get. I mean, if you take Romel as a organisation and a company, and the nature of the job that they do, they have to move the products to deliver into those regions. And how that's done is essentially on trucks, which is diesel powered. Now, I know we as a CW and the business are engaged together on developing the newer, greener sort of ideas, which is why the putting on the like gas type trucks. Some of them will be in the northwest area, but the infrastructure isn't quite fit and proper for that. So that sort of areas really is a wider political kind of campaigning that I suppose we should be doing as a trade union. And indeed, I think we are. So, I suppose we can draw likenesses where we're talking about postal workers on the street breathing poor quality air and miners that were down in the pits and end up suffering with COPD, white finger, and all the other sort of industrial injuries. And I don't think that's talked about enough with the quality of the air and such. So,
but what, Scott, if I could just come in on that.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's one of the things we need to do, and it's partly industrial. You can get monitors. You can very cheap monitors that you can buy, you can wear. So a delivery postal person can put it on their bag when they go out, which measure the quality of the air that they're breathing in, just so as we can start to assess and get some information on, like, is the problem as bad as it's being reported? Is it not as bad as we're being reported? Is it, your point, is it worse in like inner city Leeds than it is, say, in the more urban areas? And start to find out, and then and from that falls out, well, is it right to be exposed to that air for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? It's a bit like being out in the sun. I see the comment they've said about the sun. Yeah, it's like being out in the sun per se is not bad for you. Yeah, but not having a top on and sitting out in 30 degrees for 6 hours is definitely bad for you. So you get that thing where you go, well, the weather forecasts go, only stay out for 25 minutes at a time and then have a rest. We need to sort of do this stuff for that air quality. It's just like, if our job is to deliver letters through doors, yeah, the end product, you're right, then people are going to have to walk up and down streets to do that, yeah. But what is the effect of them walking up and down streets on their health? We need to start, and you can buy these monitors that you just clip on, yeah. So as you're walking around, it's measuring that air, and then you go, look, if I'm doing this delivery, yeah, in a semi-urban, semi-rural area, yeah, I'm only breathing in so many milligrams, per 1,000 per hour. Whereas if I do that walk there, I'm getting poisoned after being out half an hour. How do we deal with that? Yeah, why can we expose that individual to dangerous levels of breathing in CO2, whereas that individual doing the same job but in a different area isn't? And these are practical things we can do, which would then lead to those discussions.
It's an interesting sort of idea, really, and not something I thought about too much. But one of the comments in the previous surgery was to have Dave Joyce on as a surgery. So actually, that sort of ties into his remit as well, and that could be quite a good post to Dave, and maybe sort of a project he could work with his area safety reps and sort of try and gather some data on that. I think that'd be quite an interesting, useful aspect. So we've been on about 57, nearly 58 minutes. I just will have a quick look on the question list or the chat list, see if there's any other comments. There you go. There's Sadie's made another comment around battle for 5 years with sun cream and water, never happened, end up collapsing around Rome, get rid of quick enough as a rep. So they're things that need challenging, absolutely. So
shows you the size of the challenge we face. Just very quickly, AJ's point about COVID, he's right. COVID restrictions will be different in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and we represent all four corners of the UK. So suddenly saying everyone can come to a meeting, well, the Welsh government might say AJ can't come to that meeting, and they are things we do have to consider. AJ, we're live to that.
Excellent. So that's I think that we'll call that a wrap then, Tony. If unless there's any other comments you'd like to make before we do.
Other than thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the questions, even the ones I didn't agree with. But that's the nature of this job. I'm as you know, Scott, we'll take it head on. I'm not, not there to just deal with the easy stuff. And if I don't agree, I'll tell you I don't agree.
So yes, it's sort of finalising it off. We've got a mass of topics, some sexier than others, I think would be polite to say, Tony, but all relevant to CW members and our membership. So Tony, thank you for joining the surgery. Again, the invitation is open. It'd be fantastic to have you on again in the future.
Definitely.
If you've enjoyed the surgery, do give it a like. Do leave us a comment, even if you're viewing it afterwards, and do share it with your friends on social media. So remember, unity is strength. Thanks for watching.